Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of The County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. Today we are going to talk about the School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration and the trust fund that it feeds through its revenues. Now, SITLA is a fairly new organization as far as the state goes. It used to be the State Land Office, and it managed the trust fund for the Permanent School Trust Fund. But that trust fund was not all that big. Some short years later, with the creation of SITLA, it has increased 32-fold. So it has a successful track record, despite a little bit of controversy along the way. We are going to address the creation, the controversy, and the consequences in today's show. Let's start with a little bit of background on the creation of the School and Institutional Trust Lands.
Since 1785, the federal government has granted land to states entering the Union to help fund public education. In 1894, 11% of the land in Utah was granted for this purpose. And if you pull out a map, the individual blocks look like a checkerboard of blue across the state. The primary purpose of these lands is to bring in money to fund kindergarten all the way through high school. Unfortunately, though, the lands granted to the state were not always used to their full potential.
After nearly 96 years of statehood, we had sold off 50% of the land trust and 40% of the mineral trust that was gifted to the children, and we had less than $50 million in the bank to show for it.
During the 1980s and early 90s, the education community began looking for ways to create a greater return from the trust lands for Utah's students. What emerged from their proposals was a new independent agency that ran less like government and more like a corporation. In 1994, the School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, or SITLA, was born. Almost 2 decades later, the vision for a more productive use of trust lands is being realized.
It has a mission that's different than it was before, because the mission now is to look at the long-term and the short-term gain and benefits from the land and create as much revenue as we can to help improve the educational system in the state of Utah. As we compare where we were before and where we are now, you can see we've gone from a trust of $50 million to $1.6 billion.
The mission of SITLA is simple: utilize their 3.5 million acres of land in the most efficient way possible to benefit education. This is accomplished by leasing their parcels to energy companies for natural resource extraction, renewable energy products, commercial development, and even land sales. This year, the trust will distribute $37.8 million. The money comes from interest and dividends generated from the permanent fund, and it is a unique funding source for schools for a couple of reasons.
This is the only source that parents have the ability to make decisions about how it's spent. And so for us as parents and the staff and the principal to be able to decide how this money's spent is very important, because we know our students best.
Hiring additional people, providing hours for teachers over the summer to collaborate, buying audiobooks for auditory learners that need to hear and read along with the text. Those are things that they sound simple to do and simple to have, but on a daily operational budget there just isn't the flexibility. With the extra dollars there for trust lands and allocated from our trust lands group, it provides that flexibility where we truly see every day it benefiting kids and their learning.
With a better model, it's the hope of legislators, educators, and parents that the next century of trust lands will be far more productive than the first. For the County Seat, I'm Terry Wood.
Thanks, Terry, for that report. We will be back with a discussion about the School and Institutional Trust Land Administration, and we will cover some of the topics that have made the headlines lately and give you the rest of the story, as they say. We'll be back with the County Seat in just a minute.
Carbon County is typically known for its industry and coal production. But did you know Utah's Castle Country has something for everyone? The motocross track has been acclaimed as the most popular in Utah, with a variety of technical and natural terrain, and it even includes a pee-wee track. Visit castlecountry.com for more information.
Kanab, base camp for your southern Utah adventures. You belong in Kanab.
The best part about raising children here in Vernal and the Uinta Basin is just the smaller community that makes you feel like when you go somewhere, you know everybody.
So we packed up our 3 kids and here we came to Uinta County, and what a great place it was. What a great move. Great schools, great outdoor activities, just a really great place to raise your family.
My father, he was an engineer for Chevron, retired 39 some odd years. And Jeff, my husband, it's the same way. He's always worked in the oil and gas, always had a job here. And with that industry, when it does good, the whole valley thrives.
Uinta Basin's been fantastic in supporting what we've tried to do both as a business and also in the development of mountain bike trails and the sport of mountain biking.
I'm able to run up to a beautiful place like this and spend some good quality time. It's one of the big reasons why I live where I live.
And that makes it just a wonderful place to have little ones like this.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our topic today is the School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration. Joining us for the conversation is the Director of the School and Institutional Trust Lands, Kevin Carter. Nice to have you with us. And from the Department of Education, the Director of the School Children's Trust Fund, Tim Donaldson. SITLA's been in the headlines lately, and for a couple of reasons. What's the status on all of that, Kevin?
Well, as you've read and seen reports, a month or so back, we leased a large chunk of school trust property to a major oil company, Anadarko. It was has the potential to be a very lucrative deal for the school trust, and it made all kinds of sense for us to do it. The controversy arose when it turned out that some of the land that we had included in the lease was land that may or may not be important for the exchange process that Congressman Bishop and the governor's office are supporting in eastern Utah. And you know, this block of property, the Book Cliffs, is property that we have consolidated through land exchanges and other negotiated processes with the federal government over a course of decades to put together a large block of land for the purpose of generating revenue from oil and gas development. That's why we consolidated this property out there. Well, it turns out that we've managed it really well over the last couple of decades, and parts of it now are gold ribbon, blue ribbon, I guess you'd say, trout and hunting opportunities. And there might be members of those communities that would be displaced or displeased if oil and gas development were to occur in parts of it. The governor's office asked us, and the congressman's office asked us, if there was any way that we could reconsider this decision and maybe delay any oil and gas development that would occur in the more sensitive areas while they tried to find a replacement piece of property that both Anadarko and our office would be comfortable in having instead of these sensitive lands. And we visited with Anadarko and jointly decided, sure, that we're willing to delay going into those most southern parts, the most sensitive parts, while the congressman's office has a chance to see if there's something that is better for us.
So it did manage to keep the Anadarko's interest in the trust lands intact, but it also allows them to actually start on the larger portion of that section to start doing their research and development. Is that
yes.
correct?
They can continue to begin their exploration right now, like they always had the right to do. They can continue to do that in the northernmost portion, which is called the Three Pines area. And that's a big piece of property. It's tens of thousands of acres.
Yeah, the questioned area is actually fairly small, if I remember correctly, in comparison to the entire block.
Yeah, the most sensitive area, Bogart Canyon, is about 20,000 acres. out of a whole lease offering of nearly 80,000 acres or larger. So
it's not real small, but it's
relatively speaking, it's a small portion of it. It's still a big piece of property.
Yeah. Well, that's good. You know, kudos to your division and the governor's office for everybody for working together. It's good to see a collaborative effort because you don't usually see that in Washington.
Often not, yeah. And so what we committed to do and what Anadarko agreed to do was that they would not go into the Bogart area until January of 2016.
Well, that sounds like
so that gives 27 months at that time to see if there was something else that was more attractive, or perhaps to give us an opportunity to convince the sportsman's community that, you know, we've managed this property pretty good for the last 4 or 5 decades. We think we're pretty good stewards. We think even with oil and gas development, this can continue to be a you know, crown jewels kind of property for their experience also.
I would imagine, if I remember correctly, isn't there already a well pad in that
Several.
area?
Yeah, there's several there. Yeah.
Tim, we haven't had much chance to talk to you, so we're going to bring that back and start talking about the trust fund when we come back from our break. You're watching The County Seat right here on ABC4. We'll be back in just a minute.
Almost 45% of the oil produced in Utah, 7.8 million barrels, comes from Duchesne County. That oil feeds our state economy, provides job growth, and supports local business. Here in Duchesne County, we're working to make Utah an economic, cultural, and technological leader. Whether you're here for business or pleasure, Duchesne County will welcome you with open arms and invite you to explore all the beauty of the Uinta Mountains. Duchesne County, close enough for business, far enough to get away.
So, what brings you to town?
What brings anyone to St. George? A couple rounds of golf, a little relaxation.
What is that all?
Is there more? In a retirement community? Should have stuck with the back nine.
Rediscover your sense of adventure. Welcome to San Juan County. Discover the past. A change of place. Utah's San Juan County, where life is elevated.
Who is it?
It's me, honey. Did you let me in?
Well, not unless you got your whooping cough booster shot to protect our baby.
I forgot.
Your dinner's on the porch.
Find out where you can get vaccinated at stopwhoopingcough.org.
There's no need to travel far to find that perfect family adventure. Welcome to Utah's Nebo Loop Scenic Byway. 38 miles of winding highway through the southern end of the Wasatch Mountains. Join us in Juad County. It'll change your family forever.
Welcome back to The County Seat. We are talking today about the school and institutional trust lands. How's the structure put together?
Well, let me take that if I could. It's very important to public education that these decisions on school trust lands be made by the SITLA Board of Trustees, the business volunteers from the business community who serve on that board that are appointed by the governor. What we had in Utah was we had basically a century of the school trust being managed by the executive branch through the normal political give and take of balancing competing interest groups. And what we had to show for that was only $50 million in the permanent state school fund after a century and about half the land sold off. And so what the public education community realized and was able to prevail upon the legislature to do was to say these school trust lands and funds are far too important of a resource. We have serious challenges funding public education in this state. We make a average to above average tax effort, and we put the #1 in the entire country ratio of our public funds into public education. Nonetheless, we only have about 4.2 workers for every K-12 student in the system, where the national average is more of a 7-to-1 type ratio. So this resource is one that's way too precious to squander. And so what public education did 20 years ago was prevail upon the legislature to create a kind of quasi-public private sector model where you have a board of trustees of business leaders who hire and fire a director who makes decisions based solely on what is in the best interest of the trust beneficiaries. And so we can listen to and collaborate with other groups, but at the end of the day, the trust duties, the fiduciary duties are to act in a manner that is with sole undivided loyalty to the public schools. So it's very important to us through this process that this remain a business decision for Kevin and for his board.
When you look at a potential use out on the trust lands, what's the process that you go through internally to, maximize the revenue generation for the trust fund?
There are different processes that we follow depending on whether it's a surface use like a land sale or a lease for a telecommunication site or a mineral lease for oil and gas development or for sand and gravel. Let's say a sale, a land sale. Normally a piece of property that we want to put up for auction, we will entertain nominations from the general public on a piece of property that we own that they might want to see us put on the market. We'll take a look and see whether or not there's competing interest. If there is, then oftentimes we'll schedule it for one of our biannual land sales, put it up on the auction block and auction it off. And we established a minimum sales price based on an appraisal. Sometimes we disclose that price, sometimes we don't. It's at our discretion on what we think is going to generate the highest bids. We'll go to sale at auction, and if the high bid comes in higher than our established minimum price, we'll sell it. And our record has been on land sales about 140% above appraisal.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, so it's a very effective process. Land sales are a lot of fun. We'll have to have you guys come and film a land sale one of these days.
You know what? We will take you up on that offer.
It is a lot of fun to see people really get equity in moving through this process. Now, an oil and gas lease, that's something different. Typically, oil and gas leases will issue on one section or two sections, at most 4 sections, which is 2,500 acres roughly. Mm-hmm. And we will advertise for 30 days that we're going to offer this property for oil and gas leasing, and people will submit a sealed bid in order to acquire that lease. We sit down, we open all the sealed bids for a particular property, the high sealed bid gets it. And we go that way, and we haven't had the problem that the feds had with their oil bidding and the Tim DeChristopher issue where somebody who wasn't really interested in leasing the land could come in and trick the system. Yeah, in our system, they've got to have their check in the bid. Money's got to be right there in the bid if they're going to play. And so we haven't ever had that kind of problem. Sealed bids work really well. Oftentimes we get just the minimum bid, but sometimes you get hundreds of thousands of dollars on the bid. And it's been a lucrative thing. But the real money, of course, on oil and gas leasing comes from when they go into production and start producing. And then we get a royalty payment. And normally our royalty is 1/6 or 16 2/3% of what they produce. That's new for us. For the longest time, we were getting 12.5% or 1/8. And the federal government is still at 12.5%. So we're doing better on our royalty rates than the feds, and we're doing better than we were doing historically. With this deal with Anadarko, we negotiated 17%. So higher yet even than what our normal bid process would have brought us.
It begs the question, is part of that reason because it's so much easier to process and start operating compared to the federal permitting process?
That could be some of it. The royalty rate is indirectly proportional to risk. So if there's little risk that you're going to hit oil, you can charge a higher royalty rate. And that's what you see in Texas, where they're charging 25%. Because if you stick a stake in the ground, it's going to leak oil. In some of those places, and so they can charge a higher royalty rate. In Utah, we have a lot of areas where they're still spending millions of dollars on an exploratory well that likely is going to be a duster. And so
with this Anadarko lease getting 17%, I think that's the highest royalty rate we've ever received.
I believe it is.
And it's indicative of the fact that we have a Fortune 500 company that thinks there's a vast amount of oil there. This could really be a boon for Utah and for public schools. Yeah. We hear a lot of times criticism that this is just a drop in the bucket in terms of overall public education spending, which it really isn't. This is $37 million that went out last year, more than 1% of the public education budget. There are other states where it's 7 to 10% of the budget. And I think if we run this trust right, if we continue to run the trust lands and the trust funds in the most prudent and profitable way, in a generation's time, we can get there in Utah. And there aren't many other resources like that that this state has.
And I think they cloud the issue when they say it's only 1% of the education budget. Maybe, but it's 100% of the discretionary budget that the school gets. You know, they don't get any other money that they can actually decide how to spend it. Every other penny they get comes with not just strings, but ropes attached to it on how they can spend it. This is the discretionary money. This is the money that the school can say, wow, we could really open up another classroom and cut class sizes down for everybody by using this money. Or we can fund a computer lab or a library, or, you know, the list goes on and on. What does that school need that's not being funded? This is the money that funds it. So it's critical money.
And it allows the parental input, and it allows that maximizing of the impact at the local level.
Oh, and that's from our perspective, that's a good place to be. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and talk about the school and institutional trust lands and the permanent trust fund. We've got a couple more questions on how that fund grows. We'll be back in just a second.
The State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, SITLA, manages 3.5 million acres of Utah lands with the express purpose of providing financial support to further the education of Utah's students, while promoting local industry, oil and gas, even residential development, all at the same time. Through the careful use of trust lands, the School Land Trust Program will distribute nearly $37 million to Utah's schools this year. The State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, building the state's permanent school fund.
If you're looking for the center of the universe, well, good luck. Now, if you're looking for the center of the off-road universe, look no further than Paiute County. Hundreds of miles of trails turn your day of riding into a week, maybe even a month. Heck, a lifetime wouldn't be enough. Take off right from downtown Marysville or Circleville and experience fall colors that rival the most famous destinations in the world. There will never be a better time to ride the Paiute Trail than right now. Explore Paiute County and discover the magic and beauty of the land where the rainbow ends.
There's no need to travel far to find that perfect family adventure. Welcome to Yuba Reservoir. Boating, fishing, camping, and ATV trails await your next visit. Join us in Juab County. It'll change your family forever.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our topic today is the School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, the permanent trust fund that it creates. And I think that leads us to our next question, Tim. How does a permanent trust fund work? Because I've heard so many people say, well, we're eventually going to burn through all that money and we'll have nothing left.
No, it's actually quite the opposite. This is an amount of money that should really keep growing in perpetuity. So when the SITLA board and Kevin and his staff, when they operate every year and make, say, $80 million in net profit off the school trust lands, that goes into a permanent state school fund. So if they sell a barrel of oil, we don't spend all of that money today because it is a depleting resource. It's put in the permanent fund, and it's invested just like an endowment. So that's currently invested by the state treasurer with an investment advisory committee. The State Board of Education created a task force to look at that and maybe propose legislation next session to make sure that we're doing all that we can do with the permanent school fund and managing risk as well as we should. But that permanent state school fund, just like an endowment, it keeps growing because income from SITLA keeps coming in and you're investing it. And it is only the interest on the bonds and the dividends on the stocks that go out every year, which is how the permanent state school fund has grown from $50 million 20 years ago to $1.6 billion now. So it's 32 times bigger than it was 20 years ago. That's really amazing. This is really a gold mine to help fund public education, and the amount that goes to schools is growing every year.
On your end, Kevin, from looking at this portfolio of land, it's not just a one-shot deal on any individual parcel of land. You guys, how do you look at trying to maximize your yield from the parcels?
Let me give you just some numbers to think about. There's 55 million acres of land in Utah, one of the bigger states. 55 million acres. 28 million acres are managed by the BLM and the Forest Service. Those lands are, for the most part, wide open for public use, hunting, fishing, There's an additional 1 million acres of BLM and Forest Service wilderness in Utah. And then there's 4 million acres of national parks and national monuments. That's 33 million acres out of 55 that is managed for public access, for hunting, fishing, all of these other public uses for people to enjoy. There's 3.3 million acres of trust land. That's 10% of what the federal government's managing that we're trying to manage to make money for the schools. In my mind, if you look at that pittance of land that we have left to manage for Utah schools, it seems only fair that we be allowed to manage it to make money for schools. Some people will argue that school children need open space too. Darn straight. I agree 100%. They've got 33 million acres of open space. That's more acres than many states have total acreage, that Utah has of open space. We're way in the top 10 of open space for our kids. We are yet to crack the top 50 in spending per student.
And I would just add, if I could, it's important to realize these are not public lands. These are not lands managed that are owned by the state. These are lands that are owned by the schools. They're school trust lands. The state has these lands as trustee with mere legal title to manage them solely in the best interest of the trust beneficiaries. And part of what the Trust Lands Management Act did 20 years ago was make sure that we, to the maximum extent that we can, remove these decisions from politics and make sure that they are managed solely for the best interest of the schools. And so I think while the agency is happy to listen with and work with outside groups, and the board was happy to set up an advisory committee to try to talk through how we can collaborate on the book cliffs, at the end of the day, these are the schools' lands. They belong to the schools, and the trustee has the duty to manage them solely for the public schools.
How much, we've got a portfolio of like 3 million acres. How much is there yet to earn money for the trust fund?
If Anadarko's model is correct, then they are exploring whether or not the Manco Shale in eastern Utah is equivalent in some way to the Bakken Shale in North Dakota, which is earning money hand over fist. Their schools have increased their permanent fund by $1 billion in just a few years. And so if Anadarko's model is correct, this is serious money. This is a serious opportunity to generate money on those lands.
And gentlemen, I can't believe this half hour has just evaporated from us. I would hope that we can get together and talk about this again. Thank you so very much. I hope you now have a little bit better understanding of what the Permanent School Trust Fund is, how it works, and how the School and Institutional Trust Lands makes it happen. Be sure to tell your friends about it, invite them to watch this show online, and be sure to tune in next week for the County Seat. Remember, local government is where your life happens. You need to be involved. We thank you for joining us. We'll look for you next week.